Total humiliation, Madam Deputy. If she had any decency, she would resign. At the last budget, she said she was proud to be the country's first ever female chancellor. After this budget, she will go down as the country's worst ever.
Before we dive into today's absolute carnage in the Commons, quick question. At what point does a budget become less of a financial statement and more of a resignation letter? Asking for a friend. Actually, asking for Rachel Reeves. Because what we witnessed today wasn't just parliamentary theater, it was a full-blown demolition derby. And Kemi Badenoch showed up with a wrecking ball. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, where we bring you the chaos, the controversy, and the occasional constitutional crisis. And today, we've got all three wrapped up in one spectacular Westminster showdown. Before you continue, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more updates on this channel. Thank you. So, picture this. The House of Commons, already buzzing with that pre-question time energy, when Kemi Badenoch stands up and essentially tells the Chancellor to pack her bags and clear her desk. Not in those exact words, obviously. This is Parliament, not a particularly aggressive episode of The Apprentice. But the message was crystal clear. Rachel Reeves, in Badenoch's view, should resign. And if she won't, well, the Prime Minister should do the honors and sack her instead. Now, I know what you're thinking. Politicians calling for resignations? Hardly groundbreaking stuff. But here's the thing. Badenoch didn't just demand Reeves go quietly into that good night. She systematically dismantled the Chancellor's credibility. Piece by piece, promise by broken promise, tax rise by tax rise, until there was nothing left but what she called a spineless, shameless, and completely aimless shell of a chancellor. And honestly, the delivery was absolutely brutal. Let's start with the congratulations. Yes, you heard that right. Badenoch opened by congratulating Reeves on delivering her second budget. Sweet, right? Wrong, because she immediately followed it up with the political equivalent of a slap in the face, saying she hoped the Chancellor enjoyed it because it should be her last. That's not just shade, that's a full solar eclipse. And then came the kicker. If she had any decency, she would resign. Pause for effect. If he had a backbone, he would sack her, referring to Starmer. That's a 2-for-1 special right there. Not only is Reeves incompetent, according to Badenoch, but Starmer lacks the spine to do anything about it. It's the political equivalent of calling someone out for having a rubbish employee and being too weak to fire them. But Badenoch wasn't done warming up yet. She called this budget a nightmare before Christmas. Seasonal reference? Check. Devastating critique of economic policy? Also check. Because while most of us are worried about whether we can afford turkey this year, Reeves is out here freezing tax thresholds and basically ensuring working people get squeezed harder than a tube of toothpaste at the end of its life. It's like economic wizardry that would make Houdini jealous, except instead of escaping from chains, you're being wrapped up in them. By 2029-30, this threshold freeze will pull 780,000 more people into basic rate tax, 920,000 into higher rate tax, and 4,000 into additional rate tax. That's 1.7 million people who'll be paying more tax just because the threshold stayed frozen while everything else inflated like a balloon at a children's party. And then there's a national insurance situation. Reeves promised not to increase NI for workers. Pinky promise, Scouts honor, the whole 9 yards. But here's what she did instead. She's charging national insurance on salary sacrifice pension contributions. Now, technically, you could argue that's not increasing NI for workers. You could also argue that a hot dog is a sandwich, but that doesn't make it true or make anyone happy about it. The end result? Workers paying more. The optics? Absolutely dreadful. Badenoch called it a total humiliation, and honestly, it's hard to argue otherwise. When you spent months, maybe years, building your entire economic credibility on the promise that you won't raise taxes on working people, and then you raise taxes on working people, that's not just breaking a promise. That's taking a sledgehammer to your own political foundation. But wait, there's more, as they say in those late-night infomercials. And trust me, this government is starting to feel like one of those deals that sounds amazing until you read the fine print and realize you've somehow agreed to pay 3 easy installments of soul-crushing disappointment. Today, before Reeves even stood up in the Commons, the budget leaked. Just appeared online like a spoiler for a film nobody asked to see. Badenoch pointed this out with barely concealed glee, noting that Reeves has become the first chancellor in history to release the budget ahead of time. Now, whether this was incompetence, malice, or just someone in the Treasury with butterfingers in a Twitter account remains to be seen. But Badenoch's point stands. If Reeves won't resign for breaking her promises, she should sure as hell go for this. It's the kind of operational failure that makes you question everything. If the Treasury can't keep the budget under wraps for a few hours, what else are they leaking? The nuclear codes? The recipe for a decent cup of tea? The Prime Minister's Netflix password? And then Badenoch deployed what might be her most devastating line of the day, calling Reeves the country's worst ever chancellor. Not just bad, not merely incompetent, the worst ever. That's a title nobody wants. It's like being voted the worst contestant on Love Island, except with significantly higher stakes and unfortunately fewer opportunities to shill protein shakes on Instagram afterwards. But let's be fair here for a second. And I know fairness isn't always the most entertaining approach, but stick with me. There are some things in this budget that aren't universally terrible. The scrapping of the two-child benefit cap, for instance. This deeply unpopular policy limited how much universal credit families could claim based on how many children they had, which always felt like punishing kids for existing beyond an arbitrary number. Removing it will cost the government £3 billion, but is expected to lift 450,000 children out of poverty by 2029-30. That's not nothing. That's actually quite significant. 560,000 families will see an average increase of over £5,000 per year in their universal credit. For families struggling to feed their kids, that's transformative. So yes, Reeves is raising taxes. And yes, working people are getting squeezed. But at least some of that money is going towards preventing children from growing up in poverty. It's not the complete disaster Badenoch paints it as, though, admittedly, slightly less disastrous than claimed isn't exactly a ringing endorsement for a government that came in promising change. Here's where things get even messier, though. The Office for Budget Responsibility, which is basically the government's economic homework checker, pointed out that small boat arrivals are up 19% this year, and asylum seekers in supported accommodation are up 8%. Remember when Labour promised to stop using hotels for asylum seekers and save over £1 billion in the process? Yeah, about that. The OBR is now warning that if asylum spending stays at current levels, there'll be an additional £1.4 billion of pressure on the Home Office budget by 2028-29. That's not just a broken promise, that's a broken promise that costs over £1 billion. It's fiscal chaos with the side of humanitarian crisis. So where does this leave us? Well, we've got a chancellor who's broken virtually every major promise she made, leaked her own budget like an amateur, and is now facing calls to resign from the leader of the opposition. We've got a prime minister who, according to Badenoch, lacks the backbone to sack her. And we've got working people caught in the middle, watching their tax bills rise, while the government simultaneously struggles to manage asylum costs and keep its own house in order.